The mouse that lived in a boy's ear and never left. It started with a rustle. Faint. Delicate. Like paper being crumpled beneath a pillow. Jamie blinked into the darkness of his room, the soft orange glow of his nightlight flickering against the walls. Everything was still. The posters of his favorite comics, the half-built Lego ship on the shelf, the toy mouse he'd lost weeks ago sitting now at the edge of his desk, though he was certain it hadn't been there before. Then it came again. The sound. Closer this time. Inside his ear. Jamie was 8 years old when he first heard the whisper. It wasn't loud or frightening. It was a tickle, a feather brushing across the edge of his eardrum. At first, he thought it was a dream. A strange one. But when he woke the next morning, the whisper still echoed in the back of his head. I like it in here. He had bolted upright, wide-eyed and pale, checking the room for something. But there was nothing. Just the quiet creak of the old house, the wind slipping through the trees outside, and the faint scratching in his ear. He went to his mother, Ruth, at breakfast. There's something in my ear, he said. I heard it last night. She didn't even look up from her phone. Probably earwax, sweetheart. I'll get you drops after work. Jamie didn't argue. He never did. But this wasn't wax. And it wasn't normal. Because by that night, it spoke again. Jamie lay in bed, covers pulled to his chin. His room had never felt so cold. The whisper came soft at first, no louder than the wind. You sleep too loudly. Jamie flinched. Who are you? There was a pause. Then the voice came again. I'm CRM. The name felt wrong in Jamie's mouth. Why are you in my head? Not your head, Krim said, amused. Your ear. I climbed in when you were sleeping. Jamie clapped both hands to the sides of his head, eyes wide. Get out. The voice didn't scream. It didn't hiss. It just chuckled. You let me in. Over the next few days, things changed. Not huge things. Not yet. Just little cracks in Jamie's life. He stopped eating breakfast. Food felt dry, tasteless. He flinched at sharp sounds, doorbells, barking dogs, even his mother calling his name. And always that scratching in his right ear. The doctor found nothing. No bugs, no infection, he said with a reassuring smile. Probably just a nervous twitch. But Jamie knew better. Krim was growing. By the end of the week, Krim talked all the time. Not with words anymore, but with feelings. Urges. Nudges. When Jamie almost tripped in gym class, he felt his body move before his brain did. A swift correction, like someone else had taken the wheel. When a classmate mocked him for being quiet Jamie with earworms, Jamie felt heat rise in his palms. A sharp, burning pulse. Hurt him. Jamie didn't. Not yet. But he felt the desire crawl through him, skittering like tiny feet along his spine. His mother noticed he wasn't the same. He mumbled answers. Drew in silence. Stared into the corner of rooms as if listening to something no one else could hear. One night she found him sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, whispering into a crack beneath the couch. Who are you talking to? She asked gently. Jamie didn't even blink. He doesn't like the cold. He said we should cover the vents. Ruth knelt beside him, brushing hair from his face. Who said that, Jamie? He turned and smiled. Not his smile. Too wide. Too calm. Too empty. CRM. That night, Ruth searched every parenting blog and obscure medical forum she could find. Nothing explained her son's condition. The voices. The tick. The sudden aggression in his drawings. That night, Jamie watched her from the hallway, silent and still. He pressed his ear to the wood. He didn't blink. She's going to take me away, Krim said. Jamie nodded. I know. You won't let her. No. Good boy. The next morning, Ruth found dirt in Jamie's bed. A small trail of soil across his pillow. Tiny paw prints. And something worse. A chewed-up piece of pink insulation. From the attic. Jamie stood behind her, yawning. Krim likes nesting, he said. She spun. That's it. I'm taking you to the ER. Jamie's eyes didn't move. You can try. That night, Jamie didn't sleep in his room. Or his mother's. He slept in the walls. In the darkness, curled into himself like a pup, he whispered lullabies Krim had taught him. Strange songs with no melody. Words that tasted like dust and mildew. And somewhere deeper, beyond the drywall and the floorboards, he could hear others. Not people. Not voices. Scratches. Rustles. Krim wasn't alone. And now, neither was Jamie. By Monday morning, Jamie was no longer afraid. He walked differently. Stiffer. Slower. Like his bones were being piloted from a distance. His eyes, once a soft hazel, now looked darker, not in color but in presence. Hollowed out, glassy, like someone looking through a window from very, very far away. He didn't blink much anymore. Didn't speak unless Krim let him. And when he did, it didn't always sound like Jamie. Ruth, his mother, sat across from him at the breakfast table. She tried to act normal, but her fingers trembled as she poured milk into his cereal. Jamie stared at her. Not at the food, not the table. Just her. The stare had weight, like pressure on her chest. "You've barely eaten in days," she said, forcing a smile. "Please. Just a few bites." Jamie smiled. His lips moved, but not with warmth. "Krim doesn't like when I chew." Ruth's hand froze over the bowl. "Who is Krim?" His head tilted. "He says you already know." Later that day, Ruth made the call. A child psychiatrist. Emergency appointment. They could squeeze her in at 4 p.m. She didn't tell Jamie. Didn't want to risk another outburst. Because the night before, she'd seen something she wasn't ready to believe. She had opened the bathroom door to find Jamie standing in front of the mirror. Motionless. Shirtless. Just staring at his reflection. She almost closed the door to give him privacy, until she saw the movement. Beneath his skin. A ripple. A bulge. Tiny and fast, skittering beneath the surface of his shoulder blade like a trapped insect. And Jamie didn't even flinch. By the time she picked him up from school, it was already cloudy. The air had that coppery weight of a storm that hadn't broken yet. Jamie climbed into the passenger seat without a word. As she turned onto the main road, she glanced sideways. He was tracing circles into his pants leg with his index finger. Over and over. Tiny circles, clawing lightly at the fabric. "Where are we going?" he asked, voice soft but toneless. "Just for a checkup," she said quickly. "A doctor. About your ear." Jamie blinked. Then he smiled. "Krim says he knows." The psychiatrist's office smelled like cinnamon and plastic toys. Soft lighting. Walls painted to soothe. But the moment Jamie stepped inside, he stopped walking. Dr. Yarrow, a kind-eyed woman in her 50s, crouched down to greet him. "Hi, Jamie. I've heard you've got something going on with your ear. Would you like to draw it for me?" Jamie didn't answer. He tilted his head, then whispered something. "Quiet." Dr. Yarrow leaned closer. "What was that, sweetie? You're already too late." The session lasted 20 minutes. Ruth sat on the edge of her seat in the waiting room, clutching her purse. When the door finally opened, Dr. Yarrow didn't smile. Her face had gone pale. "I'd like to speak to you privately," she said. Jamie stood behind her, hands folded neatly, eyes locked on a vent in the ceiling. Watching. Listening. Inside her office, Dr. Yarrow kept her voice low. "I don't know what's going on," she said, "but I'm deeply concerned." Jamie described things he shouldn't understand. Dissection. Burial. A nest under the ribs. He says something is living inside him. Ruth nodded slowly. Her lips trembled. "I've seen it move," she whispered. Dr. Yarrow stiffened. "You what?" That night, Ruth didn't sleep. She sat in the hallway outside Jamie's room, back against the wall, kitchen knife clutched in both hands. The house was dead quiet, except for the tapping. It came from inside the walls. Then the floorboards. Then, horrifyingly, inside the vents. Scritch-scratch. Scritch-scratch. Then whispering. Not words. Just sounds. Tiny, high-pitched chatter. Like dozens of voices clicking together. She stood. She had to know. She opened Jamie's door slowly. And froze. Jamie wasn't in bed. The sheets had been carefully tucked to look like a sleeping body. She stepped inside. Then saw the closet door. Half open. Dark. She raised the knife and pulled it open. Nothing. Just clothes. But then she looked up. And her breath stopped. There, pressed into the top corner of the closet, upside down like an insect, was Jamie. He clung to the wall. Barefoot. His eyes wide and unblinking. Mouth barely open. As if waiting. And then he whispered. "We've made a home here." Ruth screamed. She ran. Down the stairs. Through the living room. Out the front door. But halfway across the lawn, she tripped. A sharp sting in her leg. A tear in her jeans. She looked down. Something was moving inside her pant leg. She clawed at it, screaming, trying to shake it loose. And just before it slipped away into the grass, she saw it. A mouse. But not normal. Its skin was pale and translucent. Its tail split in two. Its face was wrong, too long. And its eyes were human. Ruth limped back inside and locked every door. She wanted to leave. To run. But she couldn't. Her son was still in there, somewhere. She barricaded her bedroom, pushed the dresser against the door. She called the police. But the line crackled, then went dead. Then she heard it. In the vent above her bed. A whisper. We're inside her now. The next morning, no one saw Ruth Weller leave the house. But the mailman swore he saw her standing in the window, smiling. Too wide. Not blinking. And behind her, in the shadows of the hallway, were dozens of tiny shapes skittering along the baseboards. The neighbors didn't notice at first. The Weller house had always been the quiet one, gray shutters, peeling porch paint, mailbox leaning sideways like it had given up years ago. Ruth worked odd hours. Jamie rarely played outside. The only sound that ever spilled from within was the creak of shifting wood. But now there was a new sound. Scratching. Day and night. It came from the walls. It pulsed through the vents. It even echoed beneath the sidewalk when you stepped too close to the front gate. The neighbors didn't say anything at first, until a smell began to drift through the hedges. Inside, the house was dark. Every blind was drawn. Every room coated in shadow. Jamie stood in the hallway, his head tilted toward the wall, as if listening to a lullaby only he could hear. His hands twitched at his sides in time with the tapping, 10 tiny fingers mimicking 10,000 claws. In his right ear, Krim whispered constantly now. No more hiding. No more pretending. They're ready. Jamie smiled. Let's begin. Upstairs, Ruth sat in a wooden chair, arms hanging loosely at her sides. Her eyes were glassy. Her mouth was open. And from her left ear, something dark and wet glistened at the edge of her earlobe, like a tunnel that had been recently carved from the inside out. She blinked once. Then, as if someone else moved her body for her, she stood. That evening, a delivery man approached the Weller house with a package. He knocked once. No answer. But just as he turned to leave, the front door opened slowly on its own. Hello, he called out. Ruth Weller. No reply. Just the smell, thick, sour, and strange. And the scratching, coming from all directions. He stepped inside. That was the last time anyone saw him. The police report that followed was brief. No sign of struggle. No evidence of forced entry. No blood. But the officers who entered the house that night would never speak about what they found. Only that they never returned. All 4 resigned within a week. One of them disappeared entirely. The others refused to speak about the boy. Or the holes in the floor. Or the eyes watching them from inside the ceiling. By now, Jamie had stopped pretending to be human. He no longer sat at the dinner table. No longer walked with a child's clumsy rhythm. He moved differently now, fluid but jarring. He'd stand still for hours, listening. Then suddenly snap his head toward a wall, giggling quietly. The others in the walls answered him back. There were so many now. The town started to notice the disappearances. The delivery driver. A local plumber who never came back from a call to the Weller home. A teenage girl who dared her friends to knock on the door and hadn't come home since. But by the time people began asking real questions, the house had already changed. Its walls had softened. Its windows bulged slightly outward. And beneath the floorboards, you could hear breathing. One night, a teenage boy named Micah crept up to the Weller house with his phone recording. It was for a dare. A TikTok challenge. He approached the porch and called out, "Hey, Jamie, you still in there?" Silence. Then tapping from inside the walls. Fast. Rhythmic. Micah's voice trembled. "If you're messing with me, I swear." Creak. The front door opened. A shape stood in the doorway. Not a boy. Not really. The frame was Jamie's, but stretched, twisted. His arms moved wrong. His shoulders hunched at odd angles. Something shimmered beneath his skin, writhing in pulses, as if a nest had taken root within his bones. And from one side of his face, the ear. It was no longer human. Instead, it had widened, flattened, and twitched like a tunnel entrance. Micah screamed. The video ended there. His body was never recovered. But 3 days later, his phone showed up on a bench downtown, playing back that final frame, on a loop. The town went silent after that. No more knocks at the door. No more cops. The Weller house sat undisturbed. It had begun to breathe on its own. Krim was no longer whispering just to Jamie. He whispered to all of them. Through the pipes. Through the wires. Through cracks in bedroom walls and holes in school ceilings. Children in town started complaining about tickling in their ears. Some scratched until they bled. One boy shoved a pencil in so deep it snapped. His final words? He told me to let him in. Back in the house, Jamie, or what was left of him, sat beneath the floor, deep in the hollow crawlspace where no light reached. He was no longer alone. Hundreds of tiny shapes crawled beside him. On him. In him. Krim's family. They had all found a host. And soon, the world outside wouldn't be quiet enough to keep them out. Jamie's mouth opened wide in the dark. "We're ready." And from the walls, the answer came back in 1,000 tiny voices. "Then let us feed." Jamie no longer remembered what it felt like to be just one person. Not since the hatching. Not since Krim spread his voice through the hollow parts of him. His ears, his mind, his marrow, and opened the door inside Jamie's body that could no longer close. The transformation wasn't painful. It was peaceful. Like melting. Like falling into warm mud and letting yourself disappear. He didn't miss being a boy. He didn't miss his room or his mother's voice. Because now he had so many voices. And they were all singing to him. By late October, the town of Graveridge had changed. People still went to school. Still went to work. But something felt off. Like the entire town was holding its breath. Children walked slower. They stared at walls. Teachers began speaking with pauses in strange places, blinking just a little too slowly. And always, there was the scratching. You'd hear it in your basement, in your closet, in your teeth. The local newspaper ran headlines like, "Spike in ear infections at middle school raises concern. Town vet warns of rodent infestation. Stay indoors at night. Sewage system unusually active, engineers say, it's breathing." People joked at first. Until they stopped. Beneath the Weller house, Jamie sat still as stone. The crawlspace had widened. The dirt had softened into something like pulsing, wet clay. And all around him, the others nested, tunneling, writhing, birthing. Their tiny, pink, half-formed bodies slid through pipes and vents and veins, building paths that connected every house on the street. Every home was now a chamber. And every family a potential host. Krim whispered, "The city is a skin. We are the nerves." Jamie giggled. He understood now. The world was a body. And it was time to fill it. That night, a woman named Deborah Hines heard a sound coming from her baby monitor. Not the usual static. A voice. High-pitched. Wet. Whispering. "I hear your heartbeat. I want to live in you." Deborah rushed to her daughter's crib. The baby was still. Smiling. From her tiny right ear, something gray and twitching slipped back into the shadows of her curls. Deborah screamed. The sound never reached her neighbors. The house had been insulated. At the high school, a janitor reported a massive infestation in the gymnasium ceiling. He described the walls pulsing, droppings falling from the light fixtures. He said he heard children laughing. When asked what kind of children, he said, "Not the kind you're born with. The kind that get inside you and grow backward." He was committed to a facility 2 days later. By then, the infestation was gone. Only the laughter remained. Jamie watched it all from his tunnel. He didn't speak aloud anymore. Didn't need to. He felt everything. When the twins on Holloway Street let Krim inside. When the priest at St. Agnes began coughing up tiny bones. When the dogs stopped barking and began to howl in rhythm with the scratching. It was all part of the season. The nesting season. And it had only just begun. Inside Jamie's head, Krim whispered something new. A name. Not Jamie's. Not Ruth's. Someone they had forgotten. "Do you remember your father?" Jamie's eyes twitched. He hadn't thought of him in years. His mother never spoke about him. Just said he left. But Krim knew the truth. "He's still here," the voice purred. "Just deeper down." Jamie stood up slowly. He turned toward the tunnel behind him. The one that led below the foundation. A tunnel that pulsed with warmth. He crawled. Deeper. Faster. And then he found it. A room. Or what used to be one. Wooden beams rotted into black pillars. The air, thick with mold and decay. And in the center, a figure slumped against the wall. Half buried. Not quite dead. And from his left ear, something long and pale slithered slowly into the soil. Jamie approached. He didn't tremble. Krim's voice trembled for him. "He didn't let me in. Not like you did." Jamie stared into the hollow sockets of his father's skull. There was no anger. Only curiosity. "Why did he come here?" Jamie asked. "To stop me. To stop us." Jamie reached down. Touched the soil. It was warm. Alive. He smiled. He failed. Elsewhere, children across town began waking up in the middle of the night. Sitting up. Walking in sync. To the walls. To the vents. To the floorboards. Their parents found them whispering, heads tilted, eyes wide. Each child said the same thing. He's coming. That night, the town's power grid flickered. The radio stations glitched. And the weather forecast simply read, "They are under your skin." No one knew what it meant. But everyone felt it. The scratching wasn't outside anymore. It was inside their ears. Their throats. Their dreams. Back beneath the house, Jamie began to change. His bones elongated. His limbs twitched involuntarily. He felt Crim's children nesting in his chest. And he welcomed it. This body was no longer just Jamie. It was a hive. And it was almost ready to break open. It started at exactly 3:17 a.m. Every clock in Graveridge stopped. The town plunged into unnatural silence. No cars. No dogs. No wind. Just the faint sound of something moist, shifting beneath the soil. And then, they hatched. In the Weller house, the walls ruptured first. Not with violence. Not with blood. But with birth. Splinters peeled back like petals, revealing pale tunnels beneath. Pulsing sacs split open across the ceiling, dripping mucus and fur. Crim's children, thousands of them, spilled into the floor like a plague of tiny, squealing serpents. Each with teeth. Each searching for ears. Across town, the transformation began. Families awoke screaming, clutching their heads as something scurried beneath their scalps. Infants giggled in their cribs, already host to the first brood. Teenagers convulsed, their eyes rolled back as their bodies stiffened and cracked. No hospital could help. No priest could pray them out. Because this was no possession. This was evolution. And in the heart of it all, beneath the crawl space where it had begun, Jamie opened his mouth. Not to speak. To release. From his throat, a chorus erupted. Not words, clicks, squeals, and high-pitched static. Frequencies only the infected could understand. A summons. A call to arms. Across Graveridge, every burrowed host responded. Together, they whispered the same phrase. Let us out. By dawn, the streets were empty. Not abandoned, just quiet. Every window was dark. Every door sealed. And beneath the concrete, the tunnels pulsed. Subterranean veins. A living network. One boy's ear had been the entry point. Now the whole town was a host. A team of emergency responders was sent in from the neighboring county. They found no signs of immediate violence. Only mold creeping up walls and ceilings that wept. They knocked on the Weller house door. It opened on its own. Inside, silence. And then, from upstairs, a lullaby. A child's voice. Singing something in a language they didn't know. Wet and soft. One officer stepped inside. The door closed behind him. He didn't return. The others heard him whisper once over the radio before the line died. It's not a boy anymore. Meanwhile, back in the hive, Jamie's body had stopped looking like Jamie. His skin peeled back in strips, revealing soft gray fur underneath. His jaw dislocated, stretching unnaturally wide. His ears twitched, both of them now sharpened, open like twin tunnels ready to harbor. But it wasn't pain. It was becoming. He was no longer Crim's host. He was the next Crim. The real Crim, the original presence, had dissolved into Jamie completely. Passed on like a parasite molting into its final form. Jamie was now its voice, its vessel, and its future. Outside, a child named Ava stood barefoot in the grass, smiling. She had dirt in her teeth. In her left hand, she held something squirming, a newborn broodling, wet and blind. She tilted her head, and from her lips came the same hissed whisper. We're ready. The infection spread. Not through bites, not through air, but through stories. Children began telling each other about the boy with mice in his ears. About CRM. About the scratching. About how if you fall asleep with one ear open, they crawl in. The stories planted the thought. And the thought opened the tunnel. In a week, 6 neighboring towns had gone dark. News anchors tried to explain it. Terms like mass hysteria, neuroborne pathogen, and environmental psychosis were thrown around. But none of them explained why radio signals failed inside those zones. Why every pet vanished. Why survivors scratched at their ears until they tore chunks away, begging to be cleaned, to be emptied. One anchor, during a live broadcast, suddenly froze mid-sentence. Then smiled, too wide, and whispered into her mic. I can hear him now. By the end of the month, the plague had a name. Crim's Nest. But it was already too late. They were everywhere. Not just mice. Not just children. They were beneath. In the pipes. In the subways. In the fibers of your pillow. And once you hear the scratching, once you feel the tickle in your ear, there's only one thing you can do. Let him in. Today, they say Grave Ridge no longer exists on most maps. The satellite images blur when you try to zoom in. But sometimes, if you turn on an old AM radio and tune it just right, you'll hear the scratching. And if you listen closely, a voice, small and wet and full of teeth, will whisper, "We're still here, and we're still hungry."